Hey there, friends and enemies, JoPa here again, and today I want to go over the comparisons between Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and Marvel's Avengers, which I fully understand. Both of them are live service multiplayer superhero games that on the surface seem to be very similar, but there are some things that Suicide Squad is doing right from launch that put it in a much better position than Marvel's Avengers when that first came out, in my personal opinion. I enjoyed Avengers every time I played it. I thought it was a fun game that did some things well, but I also understand it had many flaws which ultimately held it back. First off, the campaign for the Avengers game was completely single player, which is a weird decision when you think about the game being focused on live service multiplayer endgame content for the long run. And that was something that never made sense to me whatsoever. Tying a 6 to 12 hour campaign, depending on how long you wanted to run through it, was very confusing, and I thought the campaign overall was pretty good. It could have been successful as a standalone, lesser paid option, but tying it to this multiplayer game just did not make sense to me at all. Luckily, in Suicide Squad, you can play co-op pretty much from the beginning. I'd imagine there's some sort of tutorial or something, but other than that, you can jump in with friends, you can matchmake with randoms if you would like, and it just seems to have seamless co-op and crossplay, which is also massive. So no matter what platform your friends are playing on, you can jump in with them right away. And that's something, again, that Avengers was missing, and really ultimately held it back. Games like this thrive on communities interacting and really hyping up the game, getting their friends to play. That feels difficult if you don't have multiplayer right from the beginning. If somebody who doesn't really care about the story and is only there for the loot jumps in and has to play through a single player campaign for that long, it's likely not going to happen. And it just made a disconnect between what the Avengers game was and what it wanted to be. The other thing that I think the Suicide Squad game does better already is loot. Now, in Marvel's Avengers, loot was interesting because it didn't change any type of appearance on your character. It was mostly numerical upgrades with some minor changes to abilities overall, but ultimately, it really didn't have as dramatic effect on gameplay as you would have liked. It didn't look different on your character. There was nothing like that. Whereas we see in Suicide Squad right from the beginning, one of the nice things is that when you get new mods and everything on one of your weapons, that is going to look different in your hands, which I think is pretty cool. It also, you can add some different flavors, some different abilities, some different elements to your weapons and everything that just makes it feel like there are going to be more options and more build potential, and build potential that does affect the appearance of your character. Now, you will, like Avengers, have skins for your different character, whoever you're playing as, but there's other things that will be adjusted with their appearance depending on what upgrades you have. So I think that is very, very important, and something that was missing in Avengers. When you got an upgrade to Captain America's shield, it still looked exactly the same as before you had the upgrade. It didn't get like chains on it or anything crazy like that. It still looked exactly the same based on the skin you were wearing. And I think that was a bit problematic and held people back from getting really excited about the loot in Marvel's Avengers ultimately. So I think that's a major difference between the games. Another aspect that I think is vital for Suicide Squad is the fun factor feels like it's going to be higher from the beginning because traversal is so much easier. You can really swing around the map and get into combat very quickly. That's something that, like Spider-Man, for example, that's a game that succeeds because you can go from place to place very quickly, get into combat, do your next thing, and then move on. You don't have to spend a lot of time running through the map without a lot of enemies nearby. Suicide Squad has that advantage. Some of the characters in Avengers, like Captain America, felt like you didn't want to play them as much in the beginning until they adjusted some of the movement abilities, because you had Iron Man or Thor who you could just simply fly around the map with, and it made things so much easier that it really hurt the characters who didn't have that type of movement, the Hawkeye, the Captain America, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's one of the big changes that feels like it's going to be significantly better in Suicide Squad. There's so many more options there for movement and for getting in and out of combat quickly, which I think feels really, really good. Now, some of the things we don't know about are still a little bit concerning. The roadmap for the game is going to be very important for the live service aspect. What type of end game content are we getting? So far, we know we're getting a campaign. We don't know how long it's going to be. It's nice that it is co-op, but we'll have to see how quickly you can get to end game. It doesn't have to be immediate. Like if you have a 10, 12-hour campaign, 15-hour, doesn't matter as long as there's not too much filler, for example. But ultimately, it's end game that is going to help this game either be a success long term or not. I think a lot of people look at live service and they think, oh, these games can't be successful. But Destiny, Warframe, some of these other games that have been around for a long time have been successful, but they just have to do it correctly and eventually understand that there's only so much content that can be produced month after month, year after year. So having a detailed roadmap on the future of the game, the type of end game content that can be interesting and have you really want to jump and dive into it with, for example, raids or dungeons, something like that. And it isn't just simply the same thing over and over and over again. And that's something that'll be interesting. And that ties back to Marvel's Avengers as well. When they released the game through all the way up until they had the Black Panther raid, it felt like there were not a lot of variety of enemies. And that is something that I hope Suicide Squad gets better, because lack of enemy diversity can get really boring really quickly. You just have to make some minor changes, size differences, all that kind of good stuff. But it really will feel disappointing if from launch until a year from now, we don't get a variety of enemies. We don't get any new enemies to fight or anything like that outside of maybe a boss or two. So that's something that I think Suicide Squad will have to really pay attention to if it is going to be successful long term. The roadmap is important, new characters, but I think ultimately new characters are only as valuable as the content you're taking them into. So if you bring in a new character and there's nothing new to play them in, it can definitely get a bit stale. So we'll have to see how they handle that in the long run, but I do believe that they are set up to be successful because the combat looks fun, traversal looks great. You can play co-op pretty much all the time. There seems to be a knowledge of how important endgame is going to be, even though they haven't really revealed that yet. I think we'll get a look at that prior to release. We know that on the 9th, there are going to be some previews coming out. And then hopefully before launch, we are getting the full long-term roadmap for the game, at least for the first season and beyond. So anyway, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think of the comparisons between Marvel's Avengers and Suicide Squad? Do you think they are fair, or do you think they are not going to be accurate ultimately because one is going to be more successful than the other ultimately? So I think that's a very interesting question, but for me, Suicide Squad is going to be the better game long term, as long as they continue to provide the updates that the community is requesting and looking for. My name is JoPa. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more Suicide Squad content from me going forward. I really do appreciate all the love lately. Have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.